was never awarded a national medal, but by any definition, he was a true national hero, deserving of our country's highest accolades. In any case, awards would have made no difference to him. Acquiring public or political recognition was never his motivation, nor the acquisition of personal wealth, unless they could somehow be of help to his fellow citizens. Such was the man, Chanka Maharaj.
He was the best down-to-earth politician in the country because he socialized with everybody, as I told you, and he was unemployed. He was a very wealthy fellow. He owned a lot of the properties in El Socorro belonged to him. So he didn't have a job, so to say, and he dedicated his life to serving his people.
Chanka Maharaj in 1946 left local government and joined central government. He was elected for St. George in the year of 1946 to the Legislative Council of Trinidad and Tobago. And he served in that Legislative Council of Trinidad and Tobago from 1946 to 1950. And in 1950, there were elections again for the Legislative Council of Trinidad and Tobago, and he stood for St. Joseph, and he won by an overwhelming majority the seat for St. Joseph. So he served for his second term in the Legislative Council of Trinidad and Tobago from 1950 to 1956.
He was a dedicated person, and whatever he did was for his country, not for himself, because he did not gain anything from being in politics, because at that time they got little or nothing from being a member of Parliament or everything like that, because I think he was about 17 years in county council and about 10 years in being a member of Parliament. And even a pension plan or anything, there wasn't in the making or anything. So whatever he did for his country.
I think a lot of people liked him. They liked the way he moved about doing his religious work, helping to build the school and mobilizing the people to look for drains and water courses and all these things. He didn't go out in the national horizon. He remained on the local scene, and so he was a good local politician.
Chanka, as he was commonly known, was born on the 13th of April 1913. He died at the relatively young age of 54, but made full use of his time among us, accomplishing so much in so many areas it is difficult to quantify his contribution to the development of our nation.
In 1946, he was a member of the Legislative Reform Commission set up by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. That's 1946. And he was very influential because he had, when he came there, a good experience in local government. And I think his major contribution to those constitutional discussions which took place in 1946 and 1947, it spanned over 18 months. His major contribution in that Constitutional Commission was in recommending improved measures for increasing people's representation at the county council level. He was very comprehensive. He used his experience in the local road board system. He used his experience as a people's person, to talk about what it is that the people wanted and what kinds of institutions we ought to have. And therefore, the local government, evolution of local government in the post-1946 period reflects very much the way in which Chanka Maharaj directed, in which he advised that local government should take place. The major principle of his advice and his recommendations being that what we should be doing continuously is increasing people's empowerment, giving more and more authority to the local government bodies. And he argued that if you give them more and more authority, then they would know precisely what is required for drains and recreation grounds and work programs and so on, rather than the technocrats who are sent from the ministry. And I think that has been proven to be very successful. So the fact that from 1946 right up into the 1980s we had a successful system of local government was due in a large measure to the work of Chanka Maharaj.
Chanka Maharaj was the man who was responsible for the housing of soldiers that had returned from World War II. And he then had the government acquired Cadbury Estate that was in St. Joseph Maracas Valley and give it out in 5-acre plots to the soldiers who were returning home from World War II. he never benefited from that financially. He is the person who suggested that the highway be run through the swamp, which we now know, I think that's the Beetham Highway. If you look at the Hansard debates, it was proposed to build it in the hill. And he suggested that it would not be built in the hill, it could be built through what was then the Caroni Swamp. He's the one who first proposed Carson Field and Waller Field, that farmers be given 5-acre plots of land. He's the person who proposed the formation and building of the National Flour Mills. None of these things were brilliant. They were all brilliant ideas, but none by benefiting him financially.
He donated land to the Mahasabha for the building of the El Socorro Hindu. He was very instrumental, and I've seen the documents relating to what I'm now going to tell you, very instrumental in setting up in the building of a number of Mahasabha schools, for example, in the Woodland, La Fortune area, in McBean, in Lendor Village, and in Clark Rochelle Road. So that whilst on the one hand he was very active at the national level as a member of parliament, and I'll tell you in a moment some of the things that he did as a member of parliament, the point I'm making is that he was very equally active on behalf of giving the Hindu community a kind of a place, giving them a kind of a space in the national educational system.
If you visit the fire brigade station in Sao, you would see that there is a plaque dedicated to his honor, because he is responsible for the fire brigade station being built in Sao.
It was largely as a result of his agitation and his constant representation of the people in Bamboo Settlement Number 1 and Bamboo Settlement Number 2, that the government undertook very enormous drainage projects for those areas. So that if you go to Bamboo Settlement Number 1 or Number 2 today, and you find that it is a habitation where thousands of people can now live, that was certainly not the situation in the 1950s. So it was largely as a result of the representations made by Chanka that large sections of Bamboo Number 1 and Bamboo Number 2 were drained, and therefore it was made habitable by people who moved from El Socorro and from other areas of central Trinidad into those areas. And it was largely as a result of his activity also that the whole area of El Socorro and Bamboo was converted into some of the most productive food gardens that we ever had in Trinidad. He was also very instrumental in having for the first time a lifeguard service instituted in Maracas. That was done for the first time and at the instigation of Chanka Maharaj, and having built for the first time the first fishing center we can say on the North Coast, which was a fishing center at La Fillette, because La Fillette was part of the St. George constituency in his very first term of being in the National Parliament.
His formal education in English was limited. To most, this might have been an insurmountable barrier to public office, but to a will and a body as big and as strong as Chanka's, it wasn't even a consideration.
Chanka Maharaj was a very nice man, a very lovable person. Everybody liked him, including me who fought him. I never said one word against him. The only joke we used to make, when he spelled bread in the parliament, he said B-R-E-D. So we used to tease him B-R-E-D-A. But other than that, you know, he was a good man and he served his people well in parliament and in the area.
He didn't pretend to be what he wasn't. And even though when he went to the platform and everything to give his speeches, he spoke as an uneducated person. He didn't pretend he was something else. And I think this is how he reached out to the people, and by trying to get things done for their benefit. He never tried to get things for himself.
So even though he himself never had a secondary education, he had his primary education in what was then called the Akal School, which is now the Sawan Presbyterian School up on the hill. He had his primary education there, and he was never enabled to have secondary education because there was no secondary school in that whole El Socorro Barataria area. And he saw to the improvement of that situation by having the St. George's College Barataria built, in which he went and he got the villagers, the parents and so on in the area to assist in draining the area, to assist in providing labor for the area. So the government, which was at first very reluctant to build that college, they were pushed into cooperation when he said that you don't have to do everything. We'll make it a virtual self-help project at a time when nobody was talking about self-help project.
As is so rarely the case today, Chanka Maharaj's genuine larger-than-life persona transcended racial and ethnic barriers. He was also involved with workers' rights, and his close relationship with Uriah Buzz Butler exemplified his support for the struggling working classes, especially his act of personally standing bail for 500 protesting workers who were imprisoned by government armed forces.
He was always a very strong backer of the workers' struggle in this country, and he backed it financially and in more ways than one. The stories I hear is that he stood all of them bail, and he used his properties to finance the bail or to put up bonds for them. I am also told by his deceased wife that but they hid Butler in their house when police were raiding for him, and from there they took him into the Caroni swamp, and every day they would have to ferry back and forth meals for him. That is when he was running from the police on a charge of sedition in the country. So he did support Butler. In fact, I remember very vividly seeing Butler on bent knees and tears at his funeral casket. He was also very, very strongly supportive of the Shouter Baptist movement in this country. In fact, there was a big, as I understand it, there was a very big concern at his funeral whether he will be buried as a Shouter Baptist or whether he would be buried as a Hindu, because the Shouter Baptists felt they had such a claim of right onto his life.
I think he's a role model in the sense that he really started from scratch. He started, you know, with very poor parents, very poor but very industrious parents, very deeply religious parents. And like so many other young men of the time, he just built himself up by his own bootstraps. I didn't say earlier, but one of his very first occupations was in taking fill from the Caroni area and transporting that fill by bull cart and donkey cart into the Woodbrook area, because Woodbrook at that time was also being reclaimed. Woodbrook was an area heavily under swamp. And what the Port of Spain City Council did and the Drainage Authority in Port of Spain is that they hired contractors. Bades Maharaj was one of these contractors. Chanka Maharaj was another of these contractors who were taking fill from wherever they could get it, on donkey cart, on bull cart, carrying it and helping therefore in the whole rehabilitation of the Woodbrook area. But in the process, building themselves up very gradually, and then, as I said, without any secondary education, becoming a national leader, winning 2 terms in Parliament in constituencies, even though he was Indian, and even though he was so much involved in the work of the Mahasabha, his general concern for the welfare of the public, regardless of race, was so well known that St. George, which was a very, very mixed, ethnically mixed constituency, and St. Joseph, which was equally ethnically mixed, both of them voted him in by overwhelming majorities because of the way he could touch base with everybody.
Chanka was devoted to his religion and was instrumental in the formation of the Mahasabha. But as with so many of his accomplishments, the act of leaving a positive legacy was much more important than any fame or fortune.
Up until the formation of the Mahasabha, there were 2 Hindu bodies existing in the country. And the government had refused to give them any grant for education on the basis that they were not sure which body to recognize. That is why Chanka, who was then a member of Parliament, pushed for the amalgamation of both bodies. And that is why in my view, knowing the man, that is why he declined when requested to be the first president of Mahasabha, because he felt that people would have looked upon his actions as acting out of self-interest. Yeah. You brought the 2 bodies together for the purposes of you being the king, and it would have defeated the purpose, which is he wanted to get the grant for education. So that is why he brought it together. He did not accept presidency, but he ascended and became president.
He was a Hindu, he was born a Hindu, and it was very, very important to him. I think he lived his life according to his religion, in that he was, because of his religion, he was an honest person dealing with everybody, and he tried during the time that he was in politics to help the needy. I think that was most important. I think in one of the books that I had read, that he was considered as son of the soil because he was always helping the underprivileged.
He was a huge, athletic man who excelled in sport, especially wrestling, and was considered the Caribbean champion in his heyday. His success as a wrestler may also have contributed to his grassroots popularity, as he fought and beat famous American fighters of the day.
During the time that when he was a young man and when he was first entering into the politics of the local road board, he was a wrestler. He was a wrestler, and he got the title of the Fighting Raja. And he was all over the place wrestling. In fact, he and others learned to wrestle in a mud pit on the top of where you now have the Samoa Hindu, Samoa Presbyterian School. In that area there was a mud pit, and he and others learned to wrestle so that he was in touch, reacting with people at the most basic, at the most grassroots level, we can say.
Public service did take a toll on Chanka's family life, but that was only part of the reason he quit formal politics when he did.
In that when we were smaller, he hardly had any time for his family. My mother had the full responsibility for us as little children, and he made a world tour when we were all very small. I think my youngest brother was about 1.5, I was about 2.5, my eldest sister about 5, just age, and he went on a world tour. He went a lot of places, he traveled a lot, and she had the full responsibility of taking care of us. This is why when he lost the election, he decided, the last election he had, and even though both party, the main party at that time, had asked him to come back into politics, he said no, he wanted to have time for his family to sort out his business.
I think he was always a person who stood for unity, race unity in this country. I don't think he supported the DLP. In fact, my understanding of the results of the 1956 elections was that he, in fact, stood independent as a stand of protest against the polarization of the society that was taking place by the PNM and the DLP. It may have cost him the seat, but I think he much preferred to leave politics, making a political statement rather than being remembered as a person who had no political views.
Chanka always helped the people. He was truly a unique character who would do almost anything to help his fellow man, be it education, religion, social development, workers' rights, or even sports. Chanka Maharaj was always a hero of and for the people. Dennis Mahabir, at the time opining on the life of this great man, said, Chanka Maharaj did not reveal any unexpected qualities when greatness was thrust upon him. He remained the same humble man, uncorrupted by position, his course unchanged, his life devoted with the same humility to humble folk. Chanka Maharaj is truly a true Trinidadian hero.
When the history of politics in Trinidad and Tobago is written, the name of Chanka Maharaj must be featured. Because apart from politics, he made a name for himself on the international wrestling field. Besides that, he was a man, if you have a funeral, he will come and help carry the casket. He will go in the cemetery and help dig the hole for putting the body. And anybody had a sick god, he was a man who was very, very fond and kind to people.
He's never gotten a national award. He has never gotten any recognition from the society for his contribution. But I think his funeral, from what I remember, was a testimony to the contribution of the man, in that he got his recognition from the people.
He was really a people's champion, a people's hero, who couldn't speak the English language very well, couldn't read very well or write very well, but he certainly was very articulate in espousing the grievances of the ordinary people. And in that sense, he was a real national hero.
He's a great man. He's a great man.